Racist officer calls black woman nobody. Then she introduces herself as the Attorney General. They say you should never underestimate anyone, but Officer Brandon Mills had long forgotten this simple truth. One blazing afternoon in front of the downtown courthouse, Mills spat a racial slur at a quiet, unassuming black woman and contemptuously called her a nobody. Little did he know, he had just insulted the most powerful law enforcement official in the state Attorney General, Tasha Bryant. That single moment would ignite a chain reaction of revelations, battles, and karmic retribution that rocked the local police department, riveted the public, and forever altered the destinies of everyone involved. Buckle up, this is a tale you won't want to miss. A sizzling sun hung like a molten disk over the bustling heart of Montgomery, Alabama. The air was so thick with humidity that each breath felt like sipping hot water. In the distance, the stately pillars of the Frank M. Johnson, Jr. Federal Building and United States Courthouse shimmered in a haze. People darted back and forth across the street, eager to get inside the air-conditioned sanctuary of the building before they melted under the relentless southern heat. In the midst of this frenzied scene, Officer Brandon Mills stood beside his cruiser on the curb, a permanent scowl etched onto his tanned face. Mills was in his early 40s, yet the lines around his eyes and the flecks of grey at his temples made him seem older. Days under the punishing sun and nights navigating the city's underbelly had hardened him, but not in the way that fosters empathy. If anything, it had calcified his prejudices. He eyed the throng of pedestrians with thinly veiled resentment. His practiced gaze fell upon Tasha Bryant, a poised, impeccably dressed black woman who looked to be in her mid-30s. She wore a navy blue pantsuit and carried herself like someone well accustomed to commanding attention in any room. Unlike the other passers-by who rushed in and out of the courthouse, Tasha walked with a measured pace. She neither hurried to avoid the sun nor acknowledged the sweat collecting on her brow. From across the street, Mills could see a quiet confidence in her posture that irked him for reasons he would never admit even to himself. To him, Tasha's very presence was an affront, though she had done nothing more than walk past. Driven by some twisted reflex, Mills zeroed in on her as his next target. He brushed off his uniform, adjusted his tinted sunglasses, and decided to intervene where no intervention was required. Tasha paused briefly at the courthouse steps, rummaging through her sleek leather handbag for her phone. Just as she found it, she heard an authoritative voice bark behind her. "Hey, you there! Stop!" Her first instinct was to wonder if she had dropped something or unknowingly violated some minor infraction. She turned around calmly, surprise flickering across her features when she saw the stocky police officer marching toward her, one hand on his belt, the other pointing a finger in her direction. "Yes, officer," she said politely, raising an eyebrow. She kept her tone level, mindful of not coming across as confrontational. Experience had taught her that some officers interpret even the slightest perceived challenge as a reason to escalate. Mills removed his sunglasses, revealing pale blue eyes with a hawk-like glare. "You in a hurry?" he asked, voice dripping with suspicion. "What are you doing around here?" Tasha offered a patient smile. "I'm just on my way into the courthouse." "Is there an issue?" He took a step closer, towering over her, presumably trying to intimidate. "The issue is, I don't recognize you. Usually, I see the same faces going in and out. You new here or something?" Tasha's expression remained neutral. She had encountered this type of subtle intimidation before, sometimes in a boardroom, sometimes in law enforcement settings. "I'm new to Montgomery," she said, carefully choosing her words. "I have an appointment." Mills looked her up and down, a sneer tugging at his lips. "An appointment for what? You a lawyer or something?" Tasha smiled again, but this time with a hint of steel behind it. "Yes, something like that." The tension in the air felt thick enough to slice. Passers-by started to glance curiously in their direction. Tasha remained composed, her back straight, her chin high. Mills, however, seemed determined to pick a fight, or at least make a scene. He jabbed a finger in her face, disrespect etched in every line of his sneer. "You look shady as hell," he declared. "What's your name, anyway?" Tasha took a measured breath. The old Tasha before law school, before forging her path in a complex legal world, might have bristled and snapped back. But she had learned restraint. "My name is Tasha Bryant," she said evenly. Mills stared hard, as if trying to place the name. "So, Tasha Bryant, you're telling me you got business in that courthouse? You better not be lying. I can run you in for obstruction if you're wasting my time." A flicker of annoyance passed through Tasha's eyes, but she kept her voice even. "No, officer, I'm not lying. I have an appointment with Judge Carter at 10. I'm due in his chambers shortly." Something about her manner, too calm, too certain, seemed to push Mills over the edge. Perhaps it was the unwavering way she held his gaze. Perhaps it was the faint aura of authority she wore as naturally as her tailored suit. Whatever it was, it triggered the ugliest part of him, the part that found scapegoats for his frustrations in the color of someone's skin. He leaned in, voice low but filled with venom, and spat. "You ain't nobody. You don't fool me, lady. You're just another nobody who thinks they can waltz around here like they own the place." Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Tasha felt a rush of indignation surge through her. She quickly reined it in, but not before Mills caught a glimpse of fire in her eyes. He grinned, mistaking that spark for fear. He had no idea what was coming. Tasha stood quietly, letting the weight of Mills's slur linger in the humid air. Something in her posture shifted, though. She squared her shoulders, her voice growing cooler. "Officer, the first suggest you reconsider your tone." A crowd had begun to form at a discreet distance, drawn by the tension between the uniformed officer and the self-assured woman in a power suit. Whispers fluttered through the onlookers. Some recorded with their phones, sensing that this was exactly the sort of confrontation that would go viral. Mills smirked, emboldened by the attention and apparently unaware that any of it could backfire on him. "Or what?" he taunted. "You gonna file a complaint? You think the chief's gonna care about some random nobody's complaint?" The corners of Tasha's lips curved into a tight smile. "I suspect your chief will care very much," she replied. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and brought it to her ear. "Yes, hello. This is Tasha Bryant. I'm standing outside the courthouse, and there's an officer here who might need a reminder of departmental protocol." She paused, listening for a moment, her expression unwavering. Mills stiffened, uncertainty flickering across his features for the first time. He didn't realize yet that Tasha was calling the local precinct. He just assumed she was bluffing. "What are you doing?" he barked. "You can't just—" Tasha held up a hand. "Chief Mackenzie? Yes, I'm here with one of your officers. Badge number 6723. Officer Brandon Mills. Would you mind reminding him who I am?" In that instant, Mills's face went ashen. He took a step back, confusion warring with disbelief. He could hear Tasha's phone faintly. Someone on the other end was speaking in hurried, anxious tones. Then Tasha turned the screen so Mills could see the face of his boss, Chief of Police Regina Mackenzie, a formidable woman known for her unwavering commitment to civil rights and departmental integrity. Mills froze in place. Tasha ended the call, slipped her phone into her bag, and reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. Slowly, she withdrew a small leather case. Flipping it open, she revealed a badge emblazoned with the words, "Attorney General State of Alabama." A murmur of shock rippled through the small crowd. Mills's eyes widened. He stared at the badge, then at Tasha's unwavering gaze, and realized he had done far more than pick the wrong fight. He had effectively set his career on fire. For a moment, Officer Mills looked like a stranded boat about to capsize under a merciless storm. His bravado, his sneer, and his condescension melted away, replaced by stark terror. Tasha's posture remained calm, dignified, but her eyes gleamed with an intensity that left no doubt she was done suffering fools like him. Onlookers whispered excitedly, some recording the scene with renewed energy. Tasha could see camera phones capturing every angle. She fully understood the spectacle. Unfolding this was about more than her. It was about a system that allowed certain officers to throw around intimidation without consequence, until they met someone with enough power to hold them to account. Mills struggled to form words. I didn't know you were, I didn't. He looked around, as if hoping someone would jump in and rescue him from this fiasco. But nobody did. Tasha, who had borne the brunt of his insults just moments before, let him dangle in his own discomfort. She stepped forward, her voice cold and concise. "Officer, I'll be late for a meeting with Judge Carter. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I'm sure we can do so in a more formal setting." She brushed past him, heading toward the courthouse steps. Mills stood frozen, humiliation washing over him. His gaze followed her. She disappeared through the tall doors, leaving him alone with a flabbergasted crowd and the scorching Alabama sun beating down on his throbbing temples. In the days that followed, the video of the confrontation between Officer Mills and Attorney General Tasha Bryant spread like wildfire. Local news anchors introduced segments with the sensational headline, "Racist Officer Calls Black Woman Nobody." Then she introduces herself as the Attorney General. The footage was shared across social media platforms, generating millions of views and a torrent of heated commentary. Inside the Montgomery Police Department, an uneasy tension spread. Chief Regina McKenzie wasted no time launching an internal investigation. She was acutely aware of the optics, a white officer verbally harassing a black attorney general on the courthouse steps. She also knew Tasha personally. They had crossed paths in professional circles before Tasha's appointment, and Mackenzie respected her as a serious, fair-minded official who wouldn't blow an isolated incident out of proportion unless it was truly emblematic of deeper issues. Officer Mills quickly found himself placed on administrative leave. Whispers in the department corridors grew louder. Some of his colleagues believed he had long shown signs of racial bias, while others remained defensive, claiming the video distorted the real story. An old friend of Mills, Officer George Hastings, tried to gather support within the department to frame Mills's behavior as stress-induced, but the attempt fell flat when the evidence of blatant racism was undeniable. Meanwhile, Tasha quietly continued her duties, reviewing cases, meeting with the governor, and working on plans to tackle systemic issues in the state's criminal justice system. She received countless messages of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who saw in her a symbol of triumph over racial prejudice. She also received a smaller, but more vicious, wave of hate mail, anonymous letters laced with slurs and warnings, targeting her identity. Tasha remained steady. She had faced worse before, and likely would again. But what Mills didn't know, what Tasha had not even begun to reveal, was that she already had a stack of complaints against him, filed by citizens who lacked the influence to make the department take notice. Now, with the eyes of the nation on their city, Tasha had all the leverage she needed to shine a spotlight on a rotten corner of the system. This was more than retribution. It was an opportunity for real change. Late one evening, Tasha retreated to her private office to sift through the documents relating to Officer Mills. The dull hum of the overhead lights and the faint buzz of the air conditioner were her only companions. Stacked neatly on her desk were complaint reports from citizens who alleged harassment or misconduct. One complaint stood out from the rest, filed by an older man, Mr. Randall Davis, who described a terrifying encounter with Mills at a traffic stop. The language was heart-wrenching. He pointed his gun at me, screaming that I was just another worthless old man who needed to be put down. Tasha paused, her heart sinking. According to the complaint, Mr. Davis had tried for months to get the department's Internal Affairs Division to investigate, but he never even received a phone call back. Flipping through more files, Tasha saw a pattern disproportionate harassment of black citizens and repeated use of derogatory language. While not every complaint had the same level of evidence, the sheer volume painted a troubling picture. For each person who had mustered the courage to file a complaint, there were likely dozens more who never did, resigned to the belief that the system would never listen. It was in that moment Tasha resolved to go beyond merely holding Mills accountable. She wanted to dismantle the tacit network within the department that tolerated such behavior. If that meant launching a full-scale civil rights investigation into the Montgomery Police Department, then so be it. Outside, the moon shone bright over the quiet city. Tasha closed her files, exhaustion tugging at her, but determination fueling her onward. She picked up her phone and sent a message to an investigative team at the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. She ended it with a simple but resolute line: "We need to talk." When Mills was called into Chief Mackenzie's office, he was greeted by an austere silence. The chief, a stout woman in her 50s, wore her grey hair in a short bob, her piercing green eyes exuding equal measures of frustration and disappointment. Mills sank into the chair opposite her, avoiding eye contact, pulling at the seams of his uniform as though hoping it would protect him. "Mills," Mackenzie began, her voice a low thunderclap, "you've dragged this department's name through the mud." He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand to stop him. "I'm not finished." As if verbally attacking the Attorney General wasn't enough, "I now have a file of complaints against you thick enough to fill a filing cabinet. I have eyewitness accounts. I have footage. I even have ex-partners who say you crossed the line more than once." Mills finally mustered a response, though his voice wavered. "Chief, you know how it is on the streets. Sometimes things get heated." "I was under stress," she cut him off. "Save it. This is more than stress, Mills. Stress doesn't explain multiple allegations of racism, intimidation, and outright cruelty. Stress doesn't explain pointing a gun at an unarmed old man. Stress doesn't excuse any of this." He sank deeper into the chair, a cold sweat gathering at his hairline. "What are you going to do?" Mackenzie leaned forward, steepling her fingers on the desk. "I've already put you on indefinite administrative leave pending the internal investigation. But if the Attorney General proceeds with legal action, you'll be looking at more than losing your job. You could be indicted. And if she digs deeper, and trust me, she may find more wrongdoing that ties back to other officers. This department could face a federal investigation. Do you have any idea what that means?" For a moment, Mills stared at the floor. "You're throwing me under the bus," he muttered bitterly. "No," Mackenzie snapped. "You drove the bus off the cliff, and I'm just trying to salvage what's left." She stood up and marched to the door. "Now get out of here. I have work to do." That evening, Mills returned home to a small, nondescript house on the outskirts of Montgomery. The lawn was freshly mowed. His wife, Candace, had always been meticulous about appearances. Inside, the atmosphere was strained. Their teenage son, Kevin, sat at the kitchen table, headphones clamped over his ears, scrolling through social media on his phone. He glanced up as his father walked in, eyes clouded with contempt. "You really did it this time," Kevin said, removing his headphones. "Mum's been crying in her room ever since the news showed you harassing that woman." Mills flinched. Hearing his own son speak with such disdain felt like a dagger to the heart. He tried to respond, but words failed. He instead went to find Candace, who stood in the living room, arms crossed, tears staining her cheeks. On the television screen behind her, a local channel replayed the now infamous video of Mills spitting out the word "nobody." The anchor's voiceover described Tasha Bryant as a groundbreaking attorney general, the first black woman to hold the office in the state's history. Brandon, Candace began, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. What have you done? Our faces are everywhere. People are calling, leaving ugly messages. Kevin had to walk out of practice because kids were making jokes about his racist dad. Mills tried to put a hand on her shoulder, but she flinched away. I didn't know who she was, he muttered helplessly. That's exactly the problem, she cried, voice cracking. You didn't care who she was. You treated her like dirt because you thought you could, and now our family is going to pay for your bigotry. She shook her head. You used to be a good man, Brandon. When did you become this? Mills had no answer. He had never considered himself a racist, but his actions spoke otherwise. He stood there, the gulf between who he thought he was and who he had become yawning like an endless chasm at his feet. In the silence, he heard Kevin slip out the back door, probably to escape the tension under the guise of taking a walk. Candace stared at him a moment longer, then wordlessly turned her back, leaving him alone with regret and the flickering images on the TV screen. In her office, Tasha received a knock on the door. It was Deputy Attorney General Jaime Rosales, a sharp-minded colleague who had served under multiple administrations. He looked worn, but his eyes sparkled with news. Tasha, he said, I've got some preliminary responses from the DOJ Civil Rights Division. They're interested, very interested. They want to know if you'll share the files you've been gathering on Officer Mills and any broader patterns within the MPD. Tasha nodded, gesturing for Jamie to take a seat. I expected as much, she said. It's not every day an attorney general is racially harassed on video by a police officer. I've already begun assembling a more comprehensive dossier. This is about systemic reform, not just punishing one bad cop. Jamie exhaled slowly, a sympathetic glint in his eye. Are you ready for the backlash this might bring? The Fraternal Order of Police is already rumbling about undue scrutiny. And politically, well, you know how it can play out in certain circles. Tasha set her jaw. I didn't sign up for this job to win popularity contests. If there's a culture of racism festering in some corners of the police force, we have to root it out. This is our moment to make a real impact. Amy leaned back, arms crossed, studying her. I support you 100%. Just be prepared for what comes next. This is going to shine a bright spotlight on everything. The door behind him opened again, revealing Tasha's Chief of Staff, Jasmine Lyles. She held a thick folder in her hand. Madam Attorney General, these are the statements from the complaining citizens. I've organized them chronologically, with cross-references to the officers involved. Tasha thanked her and turned to Jamie. Let's get to work. Every name, every incident, every piece of evidence. I want it all. And let's arrange a meeting with Chief Mackenzie to ensure she's cooperating fully. She paused, eyes flickering with the memory of Mills's sneer. We're not letting this slide. Not this time. The following week, Tasha found herself alone in her office long after most of the staff had gone home. She was reviewing depositions from people who alleged they had been unfairly targeted or abused by officers under Mills's watch. The accounts varied from harassing traffic stops to brutal verbal assaults, but all shared a consistent thread: the fear that no one would believe them, that complaining was futile. As she read through these emotionally charged testimonies, her own memories bubbled to the surface. She recalled being pulled over in her 20s, back when she was a stressed-out law student at Howard University. The officer asked why she was driving a fancy car. She tried to explain she was borrowing it from a friend, but he sneered, implying it was stolen. She spent an hour on the side of the road until her friend showed up with registration in hand. No ticket was issued, no apology was given. She remembered how powerless she felt, how close she came to losing faith in the system she aspired to serve. The very next day, she vowed never to let intimidation stop her from becoming a force for justice. If that meant dismantling entire frameworks of prejudice, so be it. Now she had the power she once only dreamed of wielding. She swore to use it responsibly but firmly. Wiping away a lone tear that escaped the corner of her eye, Tasha pressed on, determined to make a difference. News of the impending civil rights investigation stirred fervor among community activists. Representatives from the NAACP and the Southern Poverty Law Center reached out to Tasha's office, offering support. Local churches held prayer vigils calling for unity and justice. Public opinion polls showed a surprising shift. Even some conservative constituents who typically sided with law enforcement believed Officer Mills had crossed an unacceptable line. Meanwhile, the Fraternal Order of Police spokesperson, Sergeant Delaney, railed against what he called a witch hunt. He argued that one viral video shouldn't be enough to demonize an entire department. When asked about the numerous complaints against Mills, Delaney pivoted to talk about how policing was tough and stressful, and that split-second decisions can be misunderstood. Tasha responded publicly, maintaining a measured tone. No one denies policing is difficult, but difficulty is not an excuse for bigotry, intimidation, or abuse of power. Our goal isn't to demonize the police, but to ensure that every officer upholds the law they swore to protect. Behind closed doors, though, she felt the pressure intensify. Some members of the state legislature, beholden to influential law enforcement unions, started calling her office, urging a less confrontational approach. They warned that a federal investigation could damage the morale of officers and jeopardize public safety. But Tasha stood firm. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Cornered, and fearing both legal and personal ruin, Mills hired a flamboyant defense attorney, Carlton Green, a man known for dramatic press conferences and a knack for twisting narratives. Green wasted no time whipping up a counter-story. Mills had been set up by political operatives. Tasha had provoked him to blow the incident out of proportion and further her career. Though the theory was outlandish, certain corners of the internet lapped it up. Green scheduled a press conference in front of the Montgomery Police Department, replete with cameras and an audience of curious onlookers. Dressed in a sharp, pinstriped suit, Green took the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client, Officer Brandon Mills, is a dedicated law enforcement officer with 15 years of service. He made a mistake, he admits that. But to portray him as the face of racial hatred is unfair and grossly exaggerated. We believe that Miss Bryant, the Attorney General had a personal vendetta and used her position to orchestrate this entire fiasco. We will present evidence that proves Officer Mills is a scapegoat." Tasha watched the coverage in her office. She felt a sting of anger, but quickly reminded herself that Green was doing what high-profile defense attorneys do, distorting facts, sowing doubt, and hoping to shift public perception. No matter. She was prepared to present the evidence, the complaints, the testimonies, and the patterns of abuse that no baseless conspiracy theory could sweep away. Amid the chaos, Tasha and Chief Mackenzie arranged a private meeting. It took place in the chief's office, a space decorated with plaques and commendations. There was no coffee, no small talk, just the stark reality of two women who understood the gravity of the situation. "Tasha," Mackenzie began, sighing heavily, "I won't defend Mills. He's done more than enough damage on his own. But I'm worried about how this might affect the honest men and women on the force." "Morale is plummeting." Tasha leaned forward. "I understand, Chief, but we can't ignore what's happening. If we let Mills get away with this, it sends the message that officers can act with impunity. That's how corruption festers. Mackenzie nodded, conceding the point. I'm willing to cooperate. Just please let's be fair. Not all of my officers are like Mills. Tasha softened her voice. I know, and that's why we need to root out those who are. It'll actually help restore faith in the department for both the public and the rank-and-file officers, who do their jobs honorably. They discussed the details of the federal inquiry, the internal review, and the probable media fallout. By the end of the meeting, neither woman looked particularly happy, but they left with a shared understanding. The process would be painful, but it was the only path to real reform. A preliminary hearing was scheduled in the county courthouse to address Officer Mills's status pending the outcome of the investigations. The courtroom buzzed with spectators, media, and activists who lined the wooden pews. Mills sat at the defense table, flanked by Carlton Green. Tasha sat at the prosecution's table, supported by an assistant district attorney, Tricia Martin. The judge, a seasoned black woman named Elizabeth Harrison, gavelled the court to order. We're here to address the matter of Officer Brandon Mills, who stands accused of misconduct and faces potential civil rights violations, she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. Green rose. Your Honor, my client has received death threats, been placed on administrative leave without pay, and had his reputation tarnished by an extremely biased media. We request that all charges be dismissed and that Officer Mills be reinstated immediately. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tasha stood, projecting calm authority. Your Honor, we have ample evidence to suggest that Officer Mills engaged in repeated misconduct, including racial harassment and abuse of power. Dismissing these charges without a full review of the evidence would be a travesty of justice. Judge Harrison listened intently, her stern gaze shifting from Green to Tasha and back again. After a pause, she delivered her ruling. Officer Mills's internal case will proceed through the standard departmental review. With regard to the civil rights investigation, this court will not stand in the way of the Attorney General's efforts to ensure accountability. The request for immediate dismissal is denied, and Officer Mills will remain on administrative leave. Green opened his mouth to protest, but the gavel came down, signaling an end to the session. Mills slumped in his seat, face flushed with anger. Tasha felt a wave of relief, one step forward in a long battle. Outside, a throng of reporters waited, microphones in hand. Tasha and her team navigated through the crowd, offering only a brief statement. We trust the judicial process and will present our case in due course. As the days turned into weeks, the case dominated local conversation. Opinion was sharply divided. Some hailed Tasha as a hero, the embodiment of long overdue justice. Others saw her as a grandstander, exploiting a viral moment to further her political career at the expense of a mistaken officer. Families argued at dinner tables, church groups debated in fellowship halls. Kevin Mills, Officer Mills's teenage son, found himself ostracized at school. Friends he had known since kindergarten suddenly avoided him, unwilling to be associated with the racist cop's kid. He spent lunches alone, bitterness rising in his throat like bile. Some part of him knew his father was in the wrong, but another part of him resented Tasha for making his family's struggles so public. Meanwhile, Tasha's own nephew, Jerome, confronted a tense moment in his civics class. The teacher asked the students to discuss current events, and the topic of Officer Mills naturally came up. When classmates realized Jerome was related to the Attorney General, their questions rained down. Some were supportive, while others were sharp and accusatory. So your aunt wants to defund the police? Jerome tried to explain that was not the case, but the noise drowned him out. The entire community was on edge, each side hunkering down in its perspective. Tasha recognized the storm swirling around her, but she stayed focused on her mission. The question that kept haunting her was, even if she succeeded in exposing Mills and his enablers, could she heal the divides that had existed for generations? One evening, Tasha received an anonymous phone call at her office. The caller's voice was trembling and muffled, as though he spoke through a cloth. He refused to give his name, but Tasha had learned to keep such conversations going. Sometimes they yielded vital information. "I can't say who I am," the voice stammered, "but you need to look at the 14th Precinct incident logs from last November. Mills was involved in something big. The paperwork doesn't match what happened on the street." Tasha jotted down notes, her heart pounding. "Can you give me any more details?" she asked gently. The voice hesitated. "Just know that someone ended up in the hospital, and the official report says assisting arrest." But that's not what happened. A click, the line went dead. Tasha leaned back in her chair, the phone slipping from her grip. This could be the thread that, when pulled, unraveled the entire tapestry of corruption. She immediately sent a message to her staff, instructing them to retrieve and review all incident logs for the 14th precinct from the past year. If there was a hidden bombshell in those records, she needed to find it fast. Within days, Tasha's investigation team discovered disturbing irregularities in the 14th precinct's records. One case in particular stood out. A 19-year-old black man, Devon Brooks, was hospitalized after a brutal arrest by Officer Mills and two of his colleagues. The official report claimed Brooks had attacked the officers unprovoked, but witnesses told a different story. They said Mills had cornered Brooks in a parking lot, accused him of loitering, and when Brooks tried to walk away, Mills assaulted him. The hospital records showed injuries consistent with excessive force, not resisting arrest. Even more damning was the fact that the hospital staff had reported concerns to the department's Internal Affairs Division, only for the complaint to vanish without a trace. Tasha saw the pattern. Mills wasn't just a rogue cop. He was protected by a small network of like-minded officers, and possibly someone higher up who manipulated the paperwork. She felt a swirl of emotions: revulsion for Mills's brutality, anger at the system that protected him, and resolve to uncover the full truth. With every new piece of evidence, the case grew larger and more damning, transcending Mills's viral insult into a comprehensive expose of corruption. Equipped with the new evidence, Tasha secured a search warrant for the precinct's internal files. She arrived early one morning with federal agents in tow, setting foot into the 14th precinct's modest brick building. Officers glanced nervously as they swept through the corridors to the records room. Lieutenant Parker, a tall, stern-faced man with silver hair, stood in their way. "On whose authority?" he demanded, not budging. Tasha produced the warrant, her tone curt. Attorney General Tasha Bryant, acting in coordination with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. "We have reason to believe this precinct has withheld or falsified official records." Parker's jaw clenched. He stepped aside, but not without a glare that could peel paint off a wall. Tasha and the agents proceeded, rummaging through file cabinets, computer databases, and storage boxes. The tension was palpable. Whispers floated among the officers, some outraged, others fearful. The entire search took several hours, culminating in the seizure of key documents, digital records, and sealed evidence bags that might well spell the end of multiple careers. On her way out, Tasha locked eyes with Lieutenant Parker. She saw rage there, but also something else, perhaps fear or guilt. She didn't linger to ponder which. Flanked by federal agents, she marched out to the vehicles, evidence in hand. The precinct's foundation seemed to quake behind them. Word of the search spread rapidly. Media outlets besieged Tasha for comment. Meanwhile, inside the police department, panic ensued. Officers who had once maintained a code of silence found themselves questioning their loyalties. Some scrambled to cover their tracks. Others considered coming forward to save themselves. One evening, Tasha's phone buzzed with a text from Chief Mackenzie. "We need to talk. Urgent." Tasha immediately drove to the chief's home, a modest ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood. Chief Mackenzie greeted her at the door, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They settled in the living room, the faint hum of a ceiling fan the only sound. Mackenzie handed Tasha a folder. "This came across my desk anonymously. It's a list of officers implicated in falsifying reports related to Mills's misconduct. Some are high-ranking. This goes beyond just Mills." Tasha flipped through the folder, her stomach churning as she recognized names she had seen in the seized documents. "This is good," she said, though her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "It means we're closer to exposing the entire network." Mackenzie nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You realize this will tear the department apart." Tasha set the folder down. "Maybe that's what needs to happen," she replied softly. "Tear it apart and rebuild it stronger, fairer." The next morning, Tasha called a press conference in front of the Alabama state capitol. A sea of reporters and television cameras awaited her. She stepped up to the podium, took a calming breath, and spoke. "Good morning. As many of you know, we have been investigating allegations of police misconduct within the Montgomery Police Department, specifically involving Officer Brandon Mills. Our inquiry, in conjunction with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, has uncovered evidence suggesting a systemic pattern of abuse and falsification of reports by multiple officers. We have reason to believe these actions have disproportionately harmed communities of color. Let me be clear. We respect the many brave men and women who serve honorably in law enforcement. This investigation targets those who abuse their power and betray the badge they wear. Our goal is accountability and reform, not punishing the entire force. However, we will not hesitate to use every legal tool at our disposal to ensure justice is served. I ask for the public's patience and support as we move forward. This investigation is about upholding the constitutional rights of every citizen in this great state." She stepped back, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters. The gauntlet had been thrown. Now came the reckoning. Holed up in his attorney's office, Mills watched Tasha's press conference on a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. Green paced back and forth, phone clutched in one hand, a half-eaten bagel in the other. "They've gone nuclear," Green said between bites. "This is bigger than just you now, Brandon." "They're painting this as a systemic issue." Mills glared at the screen. He had lost weight, dark circles hollowed his eyes. "This is a witch hunt," he spat. "Everyone's throwing me under the bus." Green gave him a look that bordered on pity. "We can't fight all of this at once. The best I can do is try to negotiate some kind of plea deal. They might offer leniency if you testify about the broader corruption." Mills recoiled. "You want me to snitch on my own?" Green shrugged. "It's either that or you face the full brunt of the charges alone. And trust me, they've got enough to bury you." Mills stared out the window, guilt and anger warring within him. Moments of clarity pricked his conscience, memories of corners he cut, lines he crossed. But a lifetime of ingrained prejudice and a desperate desire to cling to his identity as a good cop made it almost impossible to accept responsibility. He simply couldn't see himself as the villain in his own story. As the investigation deepened, more officers were suspended, some even arrested. Protests broke out, some supporting Tasha's investigation, others accusing her of overreach. Signs that read "Justice for All" stood alongside signs that declared "Stop attacking our police." Inside Tasha's office, phones rang off the hook. Anonymous tips, threats, praise, and condemnation all poured in. Tasha's staff worked long hours, fueled by coffee and a sense of mission. Late one night, Tasha ventured outside for a brief moment of fresh air. She stood on the steps of the Capitol, the city lights twinkling below. It was there that a man approached her, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that obscured most of his face. "Miss Bryant," he said quietly, "I'm Devon Brooks's uncle. Thank you for not ignoring my nephew's story." Tasha felt a lump form in her throat. "How is he? He's still recovering from the trauma, physically and mentally," the man said. "But knowing someone out there cares enough to hold those responsible accountable, it means a lot." He handed her a small envelope. "This is a letter Devon wrote for you." Before she could respond, he slipped back into the darkness. She stood there, envelope in hand, feeling the weight of responsibility more acutely than ever. Back in her office, she opened it. The letter was short, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me as more than a nobody." Tasha's eyes brimmed with tears. Devon's words echoed the hurt she had once felt in her own life. If she accomplished nothing else, at least one young man knew he mattered. Months passed. The investigation matured into a full-blown civil rights lawsuit against the Montgomery Police Department and specific officers, with Brandon Mills as the primary defendant. Finally, the day arrived for the first major court proceeding that would determine whether the case would go to trial. The courthouse was packed. Protesters, supporters, and media flocked to the corridors. Tasha sat at the prosecution table, flanked by her team. Across the aisle, Mills and Green conferred in hushed tones, scanning through a mountain of documents. Judge Harrison, looking resolute, entered and called the court to order. Tasha presented the evidence methodically: internal logs, witness testimony, hospital records, and corroborating video footage. Each piece formed a damning mosaic of Mills's misconduct. Green tried to object at every turn, offering alternative explanations, misplacing blame, and questioning the credibility of witnesses. Tasha calmly deflected each attempt, fortified by the truth. By the time she rested her case, an almost tangible hush enveloped the courtroom. Judge Harrison gazed at Mills and then at Tasha. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed to trial. Officer Mills is hereby remanded for trial on charges of assault, falsifying official reports, and violation of civil rights. The broader inquiry into the department's practices will continue under federal oversight. The gavel pounded. A sense of finality rippled through the air. Tasha's team exhaled collectively, while Mills's shoulders sagged in defeat. Outside, the two camps of protesters erupted, some in cheers, others in outrage. The trial that followed was nothing short of an emotional marathon for everyone involved. Over the course of several weeks, a parade of witnesses, some trembling, others resolute, took the stand to recount their experiences with Officer Brandon Mills. The courtroom became a crucible of exposed truths and raw emotions, where each testimony chipped away at the carefully constructed facade Mills had presented for years. Tasha arrived on the first day of testimony with her shoulders squared and her head held high. Flanking her were members of the prosecution team who had spent countless nights poring over the mountain of evidence, detailed affidavits, incident reports with glaring discrepancies, and gruesome photographs documenting injuries suffered by civilians. As Tasha walked into the courtroom, she couldn't help but notice the flash of cameras and the anxious murmuring of onlookers. The entire city, it seemed, had come to witness Mills's reckoning. Early witnesses described smaller infractions, those routine traffic stops that escalated for no apparent reason. One by one, mothers, fathers, and young adults recounted how Mills would approach their vehicles with hostility. Often, they explained, it started with a menacing tone and ended with them sitting in handcuffs on the roadside for infractions as minor as a broken tail light. The consistent thread was an undercurrent of intimidation, made all the worse by racial slurs or belittling language. As the trial progressed, the accounts grew darker. A wiry man in his late 50s, Mr. Randall Davis, took the stand and spoke about how Mills had allegedly pointed a gun at him during a routine questioning, calling him just another worthless old man. Davis choked up when recalling that he had spent the night in jail on fabricated charges, even though he had done nothing more than ask why he was being detained. The packed courtroom fell silent, and many spectators bowed their heads in empathetic sorrow. Mills, seated at the defense table, averted his eyes but occasionally jotted down notes or whispered to his attorney. The prosecution's most damning evidence came from within the Montgomery Police Department itself. One officer, who asked to remain anonymous in earlier stages but ultimately chose to testify publicly, revealed how Mills consistently fabricated reports. He recounted an incident in which a teenager, Devon Brooks, was beaten so badly he had to be hospitalized. Mills's official report stated that Devon was violently resisting arrest, but the witness testified that the young man had merely been standing with his hands up, pleading for Mills to stop. The hospital records corroborated injuries that were clearly inconsistent with the self-defense narrative Mills had written into his report. Yet the final nail in Mills's coffin was the unveiling of previously buried internal affairs documents. Tasha's team presented a thick stack of papers detailing complaints against Mills that had simply disappeared after being filed. Emails and memos suggested that certain high-ranking individuals had conspired to protect Mills and suppress any investigations that might tarnish the department's image. With each page of evidence, the tension in the room ratcheted higher until it felt as though the entire gallery was collectively holding its breath. On the seventh day of the trial, the defense attempted to shift blame, arguing that Mills's actions were a product of departmental pressure and that he was being scapegoated for a culture larger than himself. But Tasha's cross-examination was relentless. She pointed out that while systemic flaws did exist, it was Mills's personal choice to harass civilians, use racial slurs, and falsify reports. She highlighted moment after moment where Mills could have chosen integrity, but instead chose malice. By the time she finished, Mills's defense attorney had run out of plausible explanations. The jury deliberated for 3 excruciating days. Outside, protesters supporting both sides clashed in heated arguments, while news vans lined the streets, feeding a constant stream of updates to the nation. On the morning of the verdict, the courtroom was so packed that latecomers had to wait in the hall, craning their necks for any glimpse of the proceedings. When the jury filed back in, the room fell into a hush so profound that one could hear the soft creak of the jury foreman's chair. He stood, cleared his throat, and read the verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including assault, falsification of official reports, and violation of civil rights. In that single moment, the courtroom erupted. Some people gasped, others wept with relief, and a few embraced complete strangers in the gallery. Mills sat stone-faced for a fleeting second before sagging against the back of his chair as though the weight of the world had just dropped onto his shoulders. Sentencing took place a week later, with the judge emphasizing how Mills had violated the public trust and inflicted immeasurable harm on those he vowed to protect. The judge's tone was resolute when she handed down a lengthy prison term, ensuring that Mills would have no quick escape from the consequences of his actions. As the courtroom emptied, he was led out in handcuffs, his eyes flickering with a mixture of shock and resignation. Outside on the courthouse steps, Tasha spoke to the press, the emotion of the trial evident in her voice. Justice has been served today, not because of any personal vendetta, but because the people of Montgomery, and indeed the entire state, deserve law enforcement. Let this be a message to anyone who wields power irresponsibly. No one is above the law. In the weeks and months that followed, a federal oversight committee began reviewing every facet of the Montgomery Police Department, instituting reforms and strict guidelines to combat racial bias. Chief Mackenzie publicly embraced these changes, vowing to enforce a culture of zero tolerance for misconduct. Some officers, relieved that the department could finally begin to rebuild its reputation, embraced the reforms wholeheartedly. Others, resistant to change, found themselves facing disciplinary measures or choosing early retirement. Slowly, community relations began to heal. Leaders from local churches and civil rights organizations set up workshops where law enforcement officials and citizens could come together, share concerns, and find solutions. The scars left by Mills's actions ran deep, but there was also a sense of renewed hope and understanding that real change might just be possible if everyone remained vigilant. For Tasha, Mills's sentencing was far from the end of her work. She continued tackling tough cases, using the momentum of this victory to push for broader policy changes. But every day she remembered Devon Brooks's poignant letter, the one thanking her for recognizing that he and everyone else labeled a nobody deserved dignity and justice. In that daily reminder, she found the strength to keep fighting so that no one, ever again, would be told they didn't matter. Thank you for journeying with me through this tale of power, prejudice, and ultimate redemption. Officer Mills's downfall wasn't just about one man. It shone a spotlight on a broader system that needed urgent reform. And it showed us the courage of everyday people willing to stand up, speak out, and break the cycle of injustice. Heroes aren't always in capes. Sometimes they're community members, attorneys, or even a determined attorney general who demands accountability for every nobody out there. If this story moved you, if you felt the tension, the drama, and the glimmer of hope at the end, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories of courage, truth, and triumph over adversity to light. Together, we can keep these important conversations going and inspire real change in our world.